Hi everyone, and welcome again to my audiovisual channel. My name is Gabriela Handal. I am a draftsman and the host of the show, A Conversation About Art, if you're new. During each episode, I look for the meaning of art and beauty through conversations with colleagues in different artistic fields. Today, I bring you episode 85, and I will have this conversation with artist Billy Norrby. If you'd like to support my channel, liking and leaving a comment and sharing this video is incredibly helpful, and so is subscribing. These three are immediate and have no additional cost to you. If you'd like to support my channel with money, you can do so by purchasing my drawings directly from my website, buying things I make on eBay, buying prints of my drawings, or leaving me a tip. These are all quite helpful in keeping this podcast and my artistic work going. The links for all of them are in the show notes. Thank you very much for watching and/or listening, and enjoy the episode. Okay, Billy Norrby, welcome to my podcast, A Conversation About Art. You are episode 85. You're very welcome. Please tell our listeners and viewers who you are and what you do. Future listeners and viewers.
Hello, everyone. My name is Billy Norrby. I'm a painter and artist. I work as an illustrator. Used to do more fine art, but now I'm predominantly like a working illustrator, and I'd say mostly in the realm of fantasy, science fiction, with clients in the book industry, toy business, card illustrations, you name it, all kinds of stuff, really. Okay. But I was predominantly like an oil painter in the past, and now I'm more of like a working illustrator.
The card illustration one, is that like what kind of cards are those?
Oh, it's similar to like it's those type of card games that you see people playing with. There are a couple of like different brands. Like Magic Cards. There's another one called like Fantasy Flight. Basically like a card game, they're all featured like a distinct illustration on it. It could be like an axe or an elf, or like a very, very typical fantasy illustration, I would say.
Okay, and was your oil work also fantasy art?
Well, in a sense, I would say it was it was closer to like the symbolist era in oil painting. If I were to pick like a genre, I showed in art galleries across California, such as like Corey Helford, Cockroach Gallery. The type of galleries that would often be featured like in Juxtapost or High Fructose. So one term that was thrown around a lot like 10 years ago was like pop surrealism, which was like a catch-all term that had all kinds of like a wide variety of art in it, but mostly figurative in one sense or another. But I mean, you literally had everything in there. You had like artists like Odd Nerdrum that could show in some place, and then Mark Wright, and everything from like very old-timey brown portraits to like melting Ronald McDonald's. But that was the deal. That was what people called it, at least.
Okay, so how did you go from that to illustrating for book covers and fantasy games? How did that happen?
It was a gradual process. Like I always had. I started like our painting and art school thinking that was going to be, that pop culture stuff was going to be my predominant direction, because it was kind of like the background I had. I started before I went to art school, right after high school, I started working for like a video game company doing like assorted art stuff and whatnot. So when I went back to school to sort of get serious about this whole art thing, I kind of had like pop culture. I had a pop culture mindset, so I was thinking that I was going to do something like either comic book related or video game related as such. And then in art school, I fell in love with more traditional mediums. I started oil painting. I'd only like drawn before that, And through friends of mine, I ended up in the gallery uh, business, or in the the California like pop surrealist art circles. And then so I had to kind of like late in the game kind of like reinvent myself as a fine artist and figure out who I was going to be in that space, basically. So I did that for a couple of years, but the whole illustration thing was always going on a little bit in the background. And being a fine artist is a roller coaster. You can be, even in all of the art industry is a roller coaster, but that one in particular, you spend a lot of time working on paintings, for an art show or similar, and you're kind of like living off your savings in the meantime. It's like you're betting on one, you're all betting on red, and you're going all in.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
everything sells, it's wonderful, but if you do an art show and it doesn't go that well, you're kind of like put on the spot a little bit.
Yeah.
So I did the whole fine art thing for a couple of years, and it was a lot of fun, but it was also like very, very stressful. So the whole illustration thing, that was like a gradual process, that was brought in just to sort of like pay the bills essentially. But then it gradually took over, because in a way you kind of like I mean, I was following the money a little bit, but I was also like following like positive reinforcement, like, well, this thing with the client worked out and they're giving me more work, so maybe I should just focus my energy on that. And also I was getting older, it's being a fine artist is also a lot of fun when you're like 29 or 30 or something, but
Right.
the older you get, the more you crave a little bit of stability, and
Right.
illustration sort of provided that, or a bit more of it at least.
Yeah. Okay. Um, okay. All right, give me a second. Um, so for the illustration work that you do you still use traditional media? Like, do you still do oil painting, or have you like moved on to using digital media?
I try to do oil paint as much as I can, or whenever practical. The thing about illustration is that it can, you can have some really tight deadlines, and you can also like deal with like very different like price points, depending on what type of client you're dealing with. I often find that it can be very fortuitous to do uh, originals in oil, just because you end up with an original. And if you have collectors out there that might want to scoop it up later, that actually means that you can sell the illustration twice, so to speak. You sell it to the publisher, and then you sell the original to the collector or whomever. Sometimes it's just not practical, because it can also be that like, hey, we need something tomorrow or in 2 days,
Right.
drawing time and all that. Like sometimes you just gotta bust out like Photoshop or Procreate. But even when I work digitally, I try to make it look like an oil painting, or I try to at least give it that sensibility, because that's the one I'm comfortable with and used to working, and the one I enjoy the most.
So when you work in digital media, what are your tools for that?
Well, I mean, various drawing tools. Like I started off with like an old Wacom pad, like most people. And now in later years I've migrated to like various drawing pads. So you have like iPads. And Procreate has been like the hot new thing these last couple of years. You have like the digital tools into this various drawing pads. Working on my PC, which is more common here in Europe compared to the States. So I sorted drawing pads basically.
Okay. Okay, so I feel like I should know why is it that a digital thing is faster than doing it in oil, but I'm not entirely sure that I know, because, for example, if you're painting like alla prima, which is, I mean, I guess you know that, but when you don't do like a ground or a grisaille or whatever it is, you just paint with the final colors, kind of, you know. Other than the issue of the oil paint itself drying, why is digital work faster to finish?
I mean, I mean, there are oil painters to do like incredible stuff a la prima and can just like get bust up like wonderful things quickly. So it's not just like you know, like digital being quicker. It's not the whole truth, you know. But there can also be other requirements. For instance, I recently did a poster for a video game, and they had like very different requirements when it came to the dimensions, you know, because they were releasing it on Nintendo and PlayStation, and they're making posters and novel and yada yada, and all of that came with like different requirements in terms of the dimensions. So what they wanted me to do basically was to like isolate all the different elements of the image. If it's a bunch of characters, they wanted all of them on separate layers so they could slide them around, you know, and make them fit, you know, each version of the image, you know. So that's, for instance, like one practical benefit of doing it digitally. Also because, I mean, I suppose, you know, that as an oil painter, I work very much in layers. That's the, you know, that was my preference, and I was trained. I was never much of like a speed paint a la prima guy, you know. So I guess like in working digitally and trying to approach the, you know, the look it would have with my trusty oil paints, you know, I guess the layered the layered style is the one, you know, the one that felt like the most natural to me, and you know, digitally, you know. But I find that like digitally, I can do like a finished like illustration in a day or 2 days or something, and that would be remarkably fast for being me if we were talking oil. You know, in oil,
right.
I think we're more looking at like 3 or 4 days or something if I'm really quickly, and if I bake my oils in the oven, you know, to make them dry faster, you know. So for me, at least, digital is a little quicker. But
right.
of course, with digital, you never get an original, you know. So, yeah. You know, there's benefits and drawbacks, you know, to everything. You know, it really also depends on the nature of the project. You know, I for instance, I did an edition of Neuromancer a while back, you know, like the famous cyberpunk novel by William Gibson. And when you work on a property like that, you have like a built-in audience, you know. So in cases like that, it can be very beneficial to paint in oil or paint in traditional mediums, you know, because you can bet, you know, that there are fans and collectors,
somebody's
you know,
gonna, yeah,
willing and eager, you know, to scoop them up, you know, if not for your name, then for the brand name, you know.
Yeah.
If you're illustrating like a, you know, like a fantasy novel or something that's not very famous, you know, and you know, the author or someone is like an independent publisher that don't have a lot of money, it might not be worth, you know, going through the extra effort, you know. So yeah, so those are the type of like, you know, those are the type of questions I weigh, you know, whenever I take on like a new assignment. Sorry, it's not sounding very romantic, you know.
Oh, I mean, it's I kind of feel like the romanticization of just being an artist is kind of overrated at this point. It's like it's kind of old. You know, like the it's like, oh, the drunk or the promiscuous or the wanderer, the drifter, or just like all of those in one person, but somehow sometimes they make just unbelievable paintings and stuff. And it's so intense, and oh my god, they're so troubled. It's like, all right, we get it. I mean, I'm over it. It's kind of old. Okay. But because I just feel like what you're talking about, like this kind of business consideration, is so neglected that it seems practically mythological in a way. It's like, oh, the successful artist, what? Like you know, it's like, what, you live off of your art? You know, you see what I'm saying? So it's like, and also there's people out there who argue that an artist who lives off of their art, who has also managed the artists themselves has managed successfully the business side of it. Is like somehow, like, the tarnish of money, capitalism, because they're communists apparently,
Right.
because money is so bad, and the source of all evils or something, and somehow those people are not true artists. It's like,
Right.
and I find that it's like, obviously the person who says that is speaking for themselves, in the sense that they just find it abhorrent to deal with that, because it's very, very difficult. Okay, it's not easy.
It's that feels like an old, like a classic argument, that hopefully has died down a little bit these last few years. I do hear Sweden, these type of arguments or accusations or finger point, whatever you call it, is something I hear all the time in Sweden. It's also
Mhm.
something I think that my teachers back in New York would talk about, like when they were students back in the day. So hopefully something that's died down a little bit. I think that the distinction between like illustration and fine art has always been blurry, some could, one
Yeah.
and it's been like gray and muddy, and some would say like, well, you just put one thing in on the wall and the other one you put on like in a book or something, And I think that that distinction is one that has never benefited the artists themselves,
Right.
And so it's been
Absolutely.
to the benefit of maybe like the art critic or gallery owner, or like all the business around the artist itself, because
Yeah.
there are certainly, I mean, I had teachers like back in art school who were like fine artists, but were like moonlighting as illustrators using a fake name essentially, and they had to do that to pay the bills.
Mhm.
Now, obviously, when you illustrate, you come across like certain, I mean, I do at least, I come across certain compromise at all times. You have to take into account the wishes and the directions of like an art director and the assignment itself. So it is a give and take, for
Right.
sure. And there are also like there are things about like doing gallery shows and showing in a gallery setting that I can really miss at times. But I will also say, like, showing at galleries was also like very much a business in a way.
Oh, for sure.
And I've certainly had like gallery directors like tell me more than once, you should paint some more of those like hot babes that you tend to do, Billy, because you always sell well, like
Yeah.
so nudge nudge, like
Yeah.
yeah, maybe that was also because I was never like Mark Ryden or super, so established that everything I touched was like turned into gold. But there's always been commercial pressures on me, regardless of which arena I've been inhabiting as an artist. And what I miss the most, from from doing gallery work is basically the feeling of writing a diary. The fact that you do like a body of art and you can look at it and you really feel very strongly where your mind was at the
Mm.
time. This is what I was thinking of. This is what it was about these years, so forth. Now there are like incredible illustrators who are also like fantastic fine artists. They are wonderful fine artists, who are also like who do illustrations all day essentially. And they put all their personal thoughts and feelings into their illustration work. It just happens to be that it's a commercial, it's a commercial setting where their art is being published, but what they do is just like magical and personal and comes straight from their heart. So
Mm.
so again, I don't really believe in these distinctions, even though there are, of course, like plenty of like shallow or repetitive or like, art that are a bit mechanical in nature and maybe not as meaningful as otherwise could be.
Mm.
But I mean but that's true for everything, right?
Right.
Like there's the good stuff and then there's the repetitive stuff that's like could be technically sound, but you can tell that, he or she's just like kind of like knocking them out or whatever.
Yeah. 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 No, I agree with you, and it's like, that's a really good point about how, uh, being an artist, a fine artist who shows in galleries, like that has its own pitfalls, and arguably like the selling out that people talk about, when an artist, like I was saying, when an artist is just has gotten really good at doing the business side of art, because you
Right.
totally, you totally see it's kind of obvious when an artist got into a gallery, and then the gallery, this body of work that they did one time happened to sell really well, and people really, really liked it and stuff. And then the gallery is like, yeah, you should totally make more of this stuff. It's like, let's make a whole ass
For
other
sure.
show
And
with this. And then the artist just keeps doing it because it's like,
absolutely. And you
yeah,
do
and
see so many fads in galleries too, or
yeah,
group shows, that you see a lot of like, oh, okay, so I guess this is the trendy animal this year, or this is like, oh, okay, I like these things, they keep popping up, so there are trends, and
sure.
it's like that with everything,
Yeah,
there are the truly original minds, and then there are a lot of, then, things become conventions, and then you have the followers, and not attacking anyone, like in
sure.
particular,
No, not at
but
all.
it's not gallery settings are not like these blissful realms where like we're chasing a buck doesn't apply,
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. No, it's a really good point. Okay. Um, yes. So I guess I'd like to talk a little bit about, all right, let me think here, because just I have to make decisions based on time as well. So just give me a
Yeah.
second. Um, yeah, so mm, what are, maybe if you can like summarize or kind of go over the similarities between fine art and illustration, similarities and differences, or no, you know what, better, what you like, no, similarities and differences between the two.
Gee. I mean, it really, I mean, that could be a tough one. I mean, there's a simple answer, and then there's like the more complicated, rambling one, because I mean, again, I do know some illustrators are so in tune, that they're always able to make any assignment their own, and they're able to make any job like a deeply personal like project where somehow it always becomes this like lovely portrait of themselves, or they bar their souls, regardless of what the external topic was, so to speak. um what the differences are. Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's certainly like time restraints at times. Like there can be like there can be, if not like a publishing date or like a deadline when something needs to be done. If you're given like a budget, like there you also reach a point where it just doesn't make sense to spend more than like 2 weeks on something, or or like a week or so, because the calculus or the math, the whole thing starts to break down.
Right.
There's also like the expectations within genre, like what type of illustration is it, for what audience, and what are their expectations. And also like, depending on, if you're doing an illustration, you are working with another person, and that's the client or the art director. So it becomes like, a conversation or a little back and forth between the two of you.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have like a lenient, if you have like a cool guy that kind of lets you do whatever wherever you want to go, that's one thing. And sometimes you have others that feel that they want to have like a lot tighter reins, and
Mm-hmm.
guide the whole thing. So it all depends. I find it's it can be a question that can be a little hard to pin down. One thing I've thought about myself, however, when I have approached illustration versus how I used to think when I was doing fine art. Well, ideally, like in the best of all worlds, there's really no difference. You find, you either you come up with a subject or a topic, if you're a fine artist, or you're given one. And in the best of all worlds, you're able to make it something very personal, and really express yourself, But often the point of doing an illustration is clarity. You want to like illustrate something, or you want to like add an image to kind of clarify a text, or like illustrate like a concept. And I often think of it as kind of like a quick medium, where like the viewer takes that quick glance at it and immediately grasp the meaning of it. It's like a little contained little circle in a way, where here's A, a knight, B, dragon, and here's the struggle. There it is. And when I was painting like in a fine art setting, I always thought of the client, or like the buyer, the collector, putting my artwork up on their wall and having it like stay there, ideally for years and years. So you're basically doing an image that's supposed to like be in someone's home, that they're supposed to look at, and sometimes when they walk by every now and then, they'll glance at it and daydream or whatnot. So I always thought of them as kind of like a slower medium. So what I try to do when I did a fine art piece is that I try to not tell the entire story. I basically try to keep the painting a little open-ended, or maybe a little bit mysterious, and not in a sense that it's like a mystery for mystery's sake, but almost as if you had like there's like a vital piece missing, like you have a painting that has like the story is 70% complete, there's a chunk missing essentially. So I would have elements in there that would act as like hooks or like things that would garner interests, or send people off in the direction or in the feeling that I overall wanted them to inhabit when they looked at my work, But I wouldn't give them the final piece of the puzzle though, because I wanted them to add like the last little piece themselves, thus completing the artwork. Okay. So I mean, like for instance, if you have that famous Andrew Wyeth painting, the woman on the field, it's called Anna's World, or what it's called, the woman on the field and the house in the background. It's very moody. Is she despairing? Is she just waking up? What's going on? Why is she staring at the house? So you have this kind of like this mysterious, haunting image, and you're kind of like looking for like clues. What's the solution to this riddle? But you are the one that kind of provide that answer. And if you're the one that provide that answer, then and complete the picture, so to speak, then it becomes a very personal experience. Some, every now and then when I did fine art, like I would have the pleasure of receiving like an email or a message from someone that just saw a painting, and nothing would make me happier when they would give me like a little rundown of what they thought the painting was about. And it wasn't exactly what I myself had kind of like thought out in terms of like story or narrative or theme, but it was close enough. It was adjacent, or it was like a neighbor, or like it was a kindred thing to what I had intended. The meaning I had, that I considered like a successful experience, because obviously I had sent them off in the in the intended direction, but then they had added like the last piece of the puzzle. So you want to create these open-ended things that leave like lingering thoughts in their head, basically.
Do you have any of that? Do you have your fine art images on your website?
I do.
Okay, because that made me curious to look at them.
Yes, and some of them are still in galleries, like a lot of them on the West Coast, and I am sort of, the grass is always greener, like when I was in the fine art scene, predominantly, I kind of like crave like, oh God, stability. Wouldn't it be so nice to know like 6 weeks from now what the heck was going on and what it was
Yeah.
doing, you know? And now, you know, like when been working, you know, as an illustrator, I'm like, oh God, this hamster wheel to associate
Yeah.
freely and
Yeah.
to just like put my thoughts onto, you know, like so it's always that, you know. So
Right.
I certainly intend to do another art show in a not too distant future. But instead of like working full time on it, you know, it's going to be something that I assemble over the course, you know, of many evenings, you know, so meaning that it will take a little longer than it usually would take me. Because back in the day, I would spend like something like 9 months or something and then bust out like a solo show of like 15 paintings or so.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can get that to like a 2 or 3 year time period,
Yeah.
that would be lovely.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Norby, what is art in your opinion?
Oh boy, asking the easy questions here, you know.
Yeah.
Gosh, yeah, it's like you know, whenever you find some kind of definition, there's always like there's always the contrary thing, you know, that kind of
Uh-huh.
you know shatters, you know, the you know whatever elegant you know like solution you come to, you know. But I mean, there's a lot of different things for a lot of people. And it's not like an original thought, you know, but I do try to think of it as a language of sort, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that are more connected to emotions and the type of dream logic that you find in your subconscious or while you're dreaming. You know, it's an arena that can be like governed less by logic and more by what's beneath the surface, and thus maybe somewhat closer to your, you know, your current state of mind in a way, or your emotional center, you know, and that's also why I find it so lovely because you can pluck these images that like come to you from your like subconscious or your dreams or whatever. Sometimes you know like you know sometimes you don't know quite know why it sort of resonates to so much to you, but you pluck these images from your dreams essentially, and you make them public. You put them in a like a communal space, you know, for others to see, you know. So it's this wonderful way of communicating. It's this wonderful language that are suited better for a certain way of thinking, you know, than maybe like our regular like word languages, so to speak, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's the language of emotions and feelings and dread and paranoia and joys and all of these things that are quite difficult of putting into words, you know. And and of course, you know, I agree with many others, you know, that art can be like joyous and ennobling and therapeutic, and you know, it can be and provocative and a lot of, you know, disruptive, all of these things, you know. But I try to think of it as sort of like a way of thinking, at least, you know, and and also like a way of taking what's inside and kind of like putting it out there, so to speak, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's also like a nice craft, you know. It's a nice thing you do with your hand as well. That's very like soothing and meditative, you know. Just that's like knitting or something, you know. So
Mm-hmm.
I do love the sheer like mechanical aspect of it as well, that you can kind of like daydream or be in the zone. It's just something you do with your hand, you know, which is very, very, you know, it's just very, very mellow as well, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so that was my the best non-answer I could come up with on the fly.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about something just now that you just said. Um, what was it? Oh, that it's like a state of mind? You said it's a state of mind? A way of
Well,
thinking?
Well, yeah, well, it's a way of maybe a way of thinking and a way of communicating. Like God, that's so vague.
Well, no,
I'm
no. I mean,
sorry.
I don't think it's necessarily vague. I would just like it if you elaborated on that, because a state of mind. It's like, for example, if you tell me state of mind, I think of because say for example that everybody gets in a mood sometimes. You're like grumpy,
Mhm.
or you had a rejection of any kind, and then you feel bad about yourself for a little while, and so like I guess I would consider like kind of like that negative that that would consider that a state of mind, for example. Or so if I wake up in a really good mood one day, and then that would be kind of like that positive state of mind. So like I guess like how would you how do you how does one apply that to art, for example? How does that work in the case of art, I wonder? Or I guess what do you
Boy,
mean? Yeah.
well, I mean, it's not I mean, I don't think it's as simple as like just like it's a state of mind, like anger or
Oh, of
happiness
course
or
not.
despair.
Yeah.
But it's certainly a way of like, like there's one thing. I mean, it's one thing if I'm feeling sad and I type it out like, oh, what a sorrowful morning or whatnot. That's one one way of communicating. But if I start constructing these images in my head,
Mhm.
that kind of like try to take that that feeling and then transmogrify it, into like
That's nice
images.
gaming language. Uh-huh.
Exactly. That feels, see, that's what I meant by language, that it's kind of like, you're crafting images, that are might be more suited for that state of mind than these words are, like in the
Mm.
same sense that, if you picked up like a violin and you played like something heartaching on it, maybe that's like a better way of communicating such a feeling, than compared to again words, or like you know the more the more typical like logic based tools that we used in our everyday.
Mhm.
Did that also not answer your question?
No, I mean that was helpful. I was just amused by the term transmogrify specifically because I learned that term like this year, because
Okay.
my husband and we were playing Diablo 4 for a while there, and don't ask me what it
Oh,
is.
funny that you would bring that one up.
Huh?
Funny that we would bring up Diablo 4. Are you referring to the paintings I did with Adam Miller?
Oh, I didn't even know that you worked on it. That's really cool.
I did not work on the game specifically, but I under the leadership of Adam Miller, we painted like a whole cathedral. We did the 16th chapel of Diablo 4. So if you type in Diablo 4 Cathedral, you'll find YouTube videos and all of that, because we filled like an entire church with demons and angels, and the barbarians from the Diablo 4 universe.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah,
Well,
sorry, that's why I thought you brought it up.
yeah, yeah, no, I mean, well, that's a cool coincidence. It didn't have to be. I mean, wasn't even on purpose. That's really cool. Adam Miller. Okay, yeah. So I mean, I don't remember what transmogrify is, but it has something to do with. Wait, don't tell me. Give me a second. Just give me a second. It's like, so like if I am dressing up my character and I find an item and I put it on the character, and then I then find another item that is more powerful or something, and I obviously have to use the more powerful item because of shield and protection and stuff, but I like the older one better, how it looks on the character. Then there's something that you do in the I feel like a jackass
I
talking
like how
about this.
this became like a computer game discussion
Yeah,
all of a
yeah,
sudden,
yeah.
and
I
I'm
mean,
like,
there's so
no.
much overlap. And then I go to the stash where I have the clothes, and then so I can have the appearance of the character continue to be the item that I like more, but then the features of the newer item are still, I'm still benefiting from those.
Interesting.
It's something like that, isn't it?
Okay. No, I just used to describe this little, the odd little alchemy that happens, when you kind of like
Yes.
pluck things from your like mushy interior and try to like put it into, put it into images.
Yes. Okay. That's funny. I'm like laughing because it's just trying to talk about this. I'm not a huge gamer or anything. I loved Diablo 4 the first season. It was fucking awesome. Um,
Mhm.
but anyway, okay. Yeah. So yeah, there's definitely. I mean, I guess in the sense that you were using the term, there's definitely a transformation that is
Yeah,
necessary if a person, if an artist wants to make whatever they have in their mind's eye visible, not just to themselves but to other people. so
yeah,
then so then that change of state, basically, because the original state is a thought, right?
yeah,
And then the change of state is when the thought becomes an image on a piece of paper or in a canvas or whatever, right?
yeah.
So then
Yeah.
that procedure of somehow kind of being filtered out through the body of the artist onto the piece of paper, it's like, then that's what you mean, that's what you use
For
transmogrify
sure.
for.
And, like this process of like, of these ideas taking shape, I mean, I mean, it has just like just going by our language, it has kind of like that mystical feeling, and it's also like in the tradition of how people thought about it in the past, like with shamans or like people using images for like spiritual purposes, like the artist being more attuned, with the higher powers or whatnot. So it's not it's no coincidence, that we throw around these phrases, when we describe that process, because it is a little murky and it is a little
Sure.
hard to pin down, even though a lot of times, it can also be pretty straightforward in that you're kind of like solving a puzzle, when you just like you're literally like translating, like from one, from one language to the other, more or less, you know. But
Mhm.
yes, it does feel like alchemy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I almost feel like it, not feel like it is, because, you know, kind of like one of the aims of alchemy was to turn stuff into gold, for example. Not everything, it's I mean, alchemy is a precursor to chemistry, which is just how matter behaves, and adding liquids to whatever, but but in the case of alchemy, it had like this thing about transforming other metals into gold, which is just obviously physically impossible, because you don't just make like lead into gold, for example, or charcoal into gold, this type of stuff. But then that's kind of like one of the intentions, I guess, of alchemy, and in a way, so in that case, it's physically impossible. But then, in the sense of transforming a form of matter into another form of matter completely different, it's like you can totally say that that's the case for a work of art, because I don't know, I haven't really looked that much into it, but apparently there's something about thoughts being physical things, having a physical shape within one's mind, and the thoughts making a specific shape of neuron or something, I don't know, within the
For sure,
brain, right? So then, that's a form of matter. And so
for sure.
if you make that thought into drawing or painting, then it's like it's absolutely changed matter. It's like,
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely,
like,
absolutely. It's
you
just
know,
like, learning if you sit down to learn Spanish or like a new language that you're not used to, it is you're like literally like building new neurons in your brain, and
right,
you're creating like new highways, and like things are physically altering, its shape in your
right.
head. And in the same way, if you pick up brushes for the first time, or if you like start to express yourself in art, you're also like physically changing the patterns of your brain.
Mhm.
So, I run into, like given there were so many wonderful artists all over the place. When I lived in New York, you could throw a rock and you'd like hit like an artist, Bushwick
Yeah,
or something. And it's not quite the same way here in Sweden, but it's also because we're maybe a little more quiet and reserved here. So if we are artists, we keep it to ourselves or something. But I do get questions from people that that maybe work in more like literal businesses, if people that work in finance or people that are engineers and whatnot, and that are not quite used, or the type of they're not either they're not used to looking at art or thinking about art or talking about art. And I do get these questions from them, like, oh, uh, like basically, like, is creativity real, and like, why, or they express, that they get like really frustrated by artwork, or they don't, they sometimes don't even like stories or movies that have kind of like open-ended endings. It's kind of like the non-clarity that bugs them. And I think it's just like, if you're not like naturally inclined, in thinking, or if you get frustrated by the more like kind of like the dream logic, or like how feelings intertwine, like that way of thinking, and it just frustrates you because it doesn't have this beautiful clarity they're used to, then I can see that, like, I can see that being something you get used to, but it's also like a language that's inherent to all people. It just takes a while in our awakened conscious state, to kind of like get used to that, and start thinking in that kind of like free associative style. Now I'm rambling. I'm sorry.
Oh, I have things to say about that. So, I mean, all right. So it might be because Sweden is, not that I know that much really about Sweden or the government or whatever, but very, socialist, which is just low-key communist. And it's like, when you talk about communism and fascism, there's very little room for art and creativity. And it's not because art wasn't produced in those, under both of those circumstances, but if you think of the art produced for like communist Russia or fascist Germany, whatever it is, it's like, it's a very specific, it's propaganda, so it's different, right? So it's not art anymore. So there's that. And the other thing is that, and I think this is more the problem, I think, with these individuals, whomever, like, it doesn't have to just be Sweden, but just anywhere who get frustrated, like you were saying. I blame that specifically on modernism and postmodernism, because they were, and like, I don't know that much about art history. I know the kind of like maybe the basics, but it's definitely like with Duchamp and this type of stuff, it's like, oh, art can be anything. Not only art can be anything, but also with contemporary art, that you have to like, oh, what was the artist's intention? What did they mean? And it's like, if you don't see what the artist meant, quote unquote, then you just don't get it, because you don't get art. You see what I'm saying? So then what that's doing is just alienating everyone from appreciating the work of art, especially, and it's like, not only that, so like this type of thing is exactly what gives permission to like just some wannabe jackass to make just whatever piece of shit, something really bad, or just take a stool and be like, oh, this is art, and it's like, it allows for that. And it also allows for the complete alienation of people that are completely excluded from enjoying a work of art, because they're just told that they don't get it.
I will say it can get very elitist,
It's just that I just feel that elitism is not accurate. I just feel like it's not elitism, because I mean, of course, there's also this whole thing about elitism being associated with art. And the elitism comes when some contemporary artist jackass is like, oh, you just don't get it. You don't get it because you can't see what you can't see what I meant. And it's like, that's so like in that case, I feel like it's the artist being just mediocre at what they're trying to do and what they're trying to say or whatever it is, and making mediocre work, or just not making art at all, and then just blaming it on the viewer and being like, no, you're just beneath my work because you don't get it. And it's like, and this is something that I learned, not that I necessarily learned recently, but I had it validated recently, and it felt really, really good to have it validated. And it's that, for example, like in your case, in my case, we make visual art. okay? Meaning that you got to look at it, okay? So the work of art has to be able to stand on its own visually, and that's it. So if the work has to be explained by a little plaque with the paragraph right next to it, like when you go to the whatever, to the museum or the art gallery, you know, if you need the plaque right next to it in order to get it, in quotes, you know, if you have to know the artist's intention, if you have to know what art is, quote unquote, if you have to know art history, if you have to know, you know, context or whatever, then that alleged artwork has a big flaw. It's like it has to stand on its own.
Some fireballs around you right now, you know.
What? Why? I mean, because it's like if I mean, I'm not throwing them at you, because it's like if you're able, if you're able to, you know, if you're able to make illustrations, then you obviously don't have that problem. And also, if you, like you were saying earlier, that lots of people will email you telling you like, oh my God, this work of yours, it's like amazing, and then they explain to you what they saw, and it's like, you know, related to what you wanted to say, it's like you obviously don't have that problem. I just think that's what I'm ranting about is a problem, and it's just confusing everything for everyone.
Right.
You know, and it's excluding people, and then they're going to be like, oh, it's because art is elitist. It's like, no, it's really not.
Sure.
You know,
I mean, that's a larger discussion, you know, and we're talking about like traditions and art movements and specific, you know, like for instance, you mentioned Sweden being like socialist or communist, you know, not so much anymore, but maybe like in the 60s and 70s, you know, like, you know, that statement might have been true, but maybe not so much anymore. You know, now we're like market capitalism here, that's like just all over the place, you know. But it certainly has like traditions, and the people that are like in are in power in Sweden, for instance, are very much, or up until recently, were people that a lot of them came up during the 60s generation, you know, with certainly like a very activist and a very politically active, like leftist generation, and also one that had a lot of ideas about artwork, you know, and you know, Sweden, like you know, post World War II, you know, like figurative artwork had a very bad name, or like a bad you know, had bad connotations given like given the Nazis, you know, like, so basically if you were drawing like realist artwork, you know, like you were kind of, you know, as a kid I often got questions like, wow, you should be more creative, meaning that I should draw like abstract, or why you want to draw like that, or are you some kind of like backward thinking Neanderthal or something, you know. um, but but I think also it's just also like a shame that like all types of artists that we, and our movement that we get like lumped in together, you know. So there's this like cat and mouse thing going on, that, you know, between like so-called like modernist art and whatnot, and more traditional stuff, you know, that I think is kind of like unnecessary and unwarranted, frankly, because like we're all doing our thing and it's not really related. It's just that we all happen to be called artists. This all happens to be called fine art, and we're supposed to, you know, so we kind of, you know, so these different pieces that are not necessarily like fit together kind of like all end up in the same spot, you know. There are, I mean, I know a lot of abstract art that I absolutely adore, you know, like, and if something that's more like non-figurative or abstract, whatever, if it has like a stronger like emotional highway right into your heart, you know, then that's the better way of like telling that story or putting that message, you know. In fact, I can get chills up my spine, you know, if I'm looking at, I mean, I saw this show recently about like the, you know, the movement that sprang up around like Bugatti, you know, the European race car manufacturer, who started out as a sculptor, and all of the artists that sprang up around him, essentially people that were like fascinated by engines and the mechanical pistons and all of these things, and they were trying to capture that, you know, that feeling or this new energy in their paintings that became like increasingly abstract. You know, I love it when I can get a sense of an artist like really grasping with a problem or trying to explore something, trying to capture a feeling, or like, Kandinsky trying to
Mm-hmm.
freeze music in one of his frames, So as soon as, whenever I can get into their headspace or see what it is they're exploring, then I find it very exciting, it's kind of like but whenever there's like this lazy, when it's just the lazy stylistic choice, oh, it's fine art because it's abstract, like when it's like, when it's shallow, that's when it's less impressive. The problem in Sweden too is that we didn't really have any figurative art either in the illustration space. So there was really nowhere to escape, if you just wanted to draw people or wanted to draw like in a figurative manner, which is why a lot of us ended up either in the United States or Florence or St. Petersburg, because those were the places where you could kind of like learn how to paint. Up until
Mm.
recently, there really weren't any like painting or drawing academies, like in Sweden, where you could really learn traditional technique. There
Oh,
was
now
some
there are?
industrial. There are now, but
Oh,
up
nice.
until recently, there weren't a lot of it. There was some industrial design, because we've always been good at like building stuff up here, be that cell phones or whatnot,
Mm.
Volvo cars or whatnot. So you could go to places and draw those,
Mm.
but that was sort of it, for a while. So things are changing here too, but it's also, I think, part of like a generational shift. There was like a generation of artists or art people that felt that they had finally defeated, like these, the constraints of like the mean old like figurative art world, and like they were embracing this brave new world where they can do just about anything. And now us mean old ghosts are kind of crawling our way back, from the sludge, so or something, but it's like, people retire, new people come in. I
Yes.
feel that a lot of the questions and arguments I run into up here in the north, I feel are the type of discussions I'm sure that people had 20 or 30 years ago at Pratt or SVA or across galleries or cafes in New York or whatever. It just takes a little longer for for those changes to migrate from the art centers, up until the smaller cities. So yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So, Mr. Norby, what is beauty in your opinion?
Oh boy. Another another good question. It could be like, well, it's one of those things. I know it when I see it, or I know it when I feel it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh gosh, I mean, beauty. I mean, you know, uh, I mean, there. Wow. I could chew on that for a while. I mean, there are things that are like just beautiful, as in they're pretty or decorative, or you enjoy looking at them. And then there are things that are just so beautiful that it just hits you like a ton of bricks, and you kind of like choke up, or it just like hits you straight in the emotional in the center. It can
Mm-hmm.
be
But
something that's
and what is the difference between those two things?
well. I mean, what is the difference between those two things? I mean, I don't know. Like, for instance, I feel that like art or beautiful things can be. I don't know if I'm going to quite answer your question now, but I can find it to be incredibly healing. Like if I'm ever felt like a little depressed or down, or I've been down on my luck in life, or like sad things have taken place. I know that how incredibly soothing it can be, when you're walking across, like here in Stockholm, we have like these we have Old Town with the old architecture, with the old ornaments, the statues, the floral patterns, the pillars, these things that the decorated cities essentially, and
Yeah.
the water on one side, and that regardless regardless of like how dire things are, or if this person has left me or whatever, there's beauty in this world, and there's beauty for me to partake in, like,
Mm.
or to take in, that, and that is very soothing and calming for the soul. Um, then there's the type of stuff that for one reason or the other just like garners like a huge emotional reaction for you. It's like overwhelming, or you're not prepared, and that can be like when you step into like a large cathedral, or when you suddenly turn around and there's this painting that you didn't see before, and it just like, it makes you choke up or whatever. And those things are few and far between, but it's absolutely wonderful when it happens. But um, but yeah, I don't really know how to answer this one, other than one always strives to make things beautiful, but if I knew exactly what it was, and I could just pin down the answer, then I feel that I would be a very successful painter, because I would just like knock them out. But it's like it's the pot of gold over the rainbow. We kind of like seek for it, or it's the El Dorado, when we kind of get glimpses of it, here and there. But yeah.
Okay. Well,
sorry,
no,
sorry if I didn't answer that one, or if it didn't lead to a good
no,
conversation.
that's that's not a problem at all. I actually really like this, especially this letter part. After I asked you what's the difference between the pretty stuff and the beautiful stuff, because I feel like it insinuates. I mean, I feel like what you were just saying insinuates that beauty is an ideal or a goal, um, in the sense that it's something that we're always working towards. It's something towards which we're always working. It's like
Right.
with a work of art, with each work of art, it's like sometimes a work of art turns out better for whatever reason than another work of art. And what's the reason? I don't know. Were you inspired?
Sure.
Something that you did in this one is really very, the composition is particularly good or whatever, but it's like, but the question is still like, why? And I think that when that happens, it's like, that's like the glimpse that you're talking about, that sometimes a little bit of that striving towards the goal was more effective somehow in that
Right.
work about
I
that
mean,
turned out
one
better.
can try to break it down, like for instance, we humans, we love looking at organic things. We love nature, and we love other humans. So whenever you work with shapes, things, like that, like remind us of nature, like if you think of like Art Nouveau, those type of shapes, or if you just, we love looking at humans, we love looking at faces. So things that tend to you know, shapes of painting, sculptures, whatever that lean in that direction is something that we humans find intriguing. And of course, there are also all these rules, when it comes to design, color harmonies, the rule of thirds, the golden, the golden cut, and
Mm-hmm.
and all of these things. Um, to me, like one thing I've kind of like struggled with, when it comes to like creating like meaningful art, is trying to it's like the ambition of trying to express yourself as clearly as you can, like to tap into like your emotions in their rawest, purest form, which is like very, very difficult. It's like, you can say paint whatever you want, but you kind of often find yourself like beating around the bush or trying to get at something. And a lot of times it just takes repeating over and over and over again before you like develop these thoughts. So there's also, it takes a while to like shape your visual identity, or like shape your artistry.
Mm-hmm.
Not just in terms of like finding your style or whatnot, or improving your craft, or like, a lot of artists, they initially copy, the
Right.
people they admire, but then they slowly come into their own. But there's also like this almost like Buddhist process of trying to strip away, of like getting at why you're drawn to these things or why you want to draw and paint certain things, and that can be very difficult. Some people get at it early, with ease, while others it takes like a whole lifetime, because it's
Mm-hmm.
also like a very self-therapeutic process, because for example, we humans, each one of us, we have these little personal visual ticks, the stuff that I like to paint and stuff that you like to paint, almost like ravens and crows, like gathering like shiny things. Someone maybe loves, the color pink or certain like tree shapes or certain compositions, while others love like jade, the stone or whatnot, or these textures, that we have all these things that we like, that we all like gather and collect and put in our paintings.
Yes.
And then you start to dig deeper, then or you can at least, like, well, why do I like these things? Why am I hung up on these things? So why do these type of elements always like creep into my artwork? Like, and if you try to like unravel that, that can be like, then you can end up like in the psychological or the therapeutic realm, like for instance, a lot of my work often featured, like darker stones or like cast iron or like old like in an old metal furnaces and whatnot, and I thought that like, oh, okay, I like this because it's like I love the juxtaposition between like these darker things and then like these floral things, and then, like, I mean, these are not, it's comically obvious, when other people point it out, but, of course, we're all blind to our own like obvious spots, but, I kept drawing and painting these things, and maybe after a while, the obvious answer started to emerge. It's like, oh, maybe these little black little things, maybe that's me, maybe that's me, like, do I have a little hard shell or something? Or are there certain things that I have a hard time expressing? Do I feel like a little black and a little volcanic rock in this world or whatnot? And I mean, it's like I said, it can be like comically obvious stuff like that, but when you're inside in the thick of it, it might not be so obvious to you, we have all these things we pick at, like, and thread at, and I've been trying to understand them, so I can communicate clearer. Because if I analyze and try to understand these things that keep popping up in my images, then maybe I can understand better what it is I'm trying to say, and if I do that, then hopefully I can construct like better images, like purer images, So, self-expression is hard, So beyond just like becoming like a better draftsman and becoming good at painting or good at drawing, like just stripping down what it is you're trying to say, very, very difficult, you have to declutter essentially, and that takes a long time. And I do think that it relates to what you said about beauty, because when you get to that like pure like laser beam of like your inner thoughts, like when you just shoot it out there, then it is likelier that an audience member or someone like taking in your art will be like struck by that like emotion, and like feel it in their heart, So, I mean, beauty, I mean, human expression, I don't know if that's a good answer, but also, of course, the fact that, the old saying that beauty is fleeting, the fact that it's only beautiful because it is difficult to attain and because we're immortal and we're not going to be around. And, and it's also, there's a certain like beauty in the hopelessness of it all, the beauty of pushing that rock up the cliff, only to having it tumble down again and just picking up, it's because we won't like survive, and it's because, we are fallible, and it's because we try, that's why it's beautiful, And it's also why it's such a miracle when beauty exists, when someone actually creates like a beautiful work of art, that's like a small miracle, because there's just so many things that had to come together, to create this little magic moment for you, So, yeah.
Yeah, I particularly like what you were saying just before this about the imagery that keeps showing up in a person's work of art. Like you were saying, for you, it was like the furnace and a rock, I think.
Sure. The obsessions, that was just an example.
Sure. Yeah, but I mean, I think it's perfectly valid as part of what you were saying, and I liked that aspect, that part in particular that you were talking about, because I think it kind of threads together with what you were saying earlier about the dream logic within art. And it reminds me of, because I've been listening to Jordan Peterson lectures, but the ones where he talks about the psychological significance of the Bible. Okay. I've only listened to one of them because each one is very long, but he is a really big Jung fan. And Jung talks a lot. I mean, I don't know jack shit about Jung, okay? But I'm aware that he has this whole thing with archetypes and with dreams and stuff. And so, like, one of the things that frustrates me in general about just like the way that we, humans talk about certain things is that we tend to favor a specific type of logic. Meaning that, 1 + 1 is 2, math logic, So like, it's like, that is like the epitome of logic, for example. But the thing about dreams is that they have their own logic and their own physics. We just don't get it.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? But, so what?
No, yes, they are not the type of logic, that
we're used to.
Financial sense, and why not, like,
right.
a respectable society, like champions it, but it is the type of like logic that is very important for our emotional well-being, and in the absence of it, we become absolutely miserable. So, but it can be something that like can be hard to quantify in a way that like the commercial powers that be, like find useful, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I liked that in particular, and like all of the connections that I was making with this stuff that I have, been listening to, and like what you said at the beginning. And so, and I also quite like it as part of the ending of the conversation, because Mr. Norrby, we have broken the hour-long mark, and we are at an hour and 11 minutes. So I'm going to start to close it out. Is there anything that you want to add? Where can people find your work? What do you have coming up? Is there anything you're excited about?
Well, thank you everyone for listening. I hope you found anything. I hope you found anything nice, in between my ramblings, You can find my art at billynorrby.com. That's Norrby with 2 R's, as we spell it up in Sweden. I have a lot of illustration work coming up, sadly, stuff that I can't publish in the immediate future because of NDAs. But hopefully I'll have more oil paintings to show in the near future. So keep an eye on those socials, Of course, I'm on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all of these things, So hang around there, and good things may show up. Thank you so much for giving the opportunity to speak. I hope I made the most of it.
No, I think you did. I really appreciate your time, and I'm gonna do a quick YouTube outro, YouTube style outro, if you can tolerate that. So thank you, Billy, for joining me, your time, your words, and your thoughts. Thank you everyone for joining us. Feel free to let Billy and I know what you think of this conversation in the comments. I encourage you to like this video and share it with any and all pertinent individuals, as it helps the channel, and this way more people can listen to these interviews and participate in the conversation in general. Finally, I invite you to subscribe to my audiovisual channel, because I have more conversations scheduled. If you want to support Billy, myself, this podcast, or all three, the links will be in the show notes. Thank you, everyone, and see you next time. Bye.
Bye.